like a really wonderful thing if our default setting, when we contemplated our brothers and sisters and when we contemplated the earth and the way that it was created and society today and the way that it is and all God's creation, if our default setting was, it's not just good, but it's very good. Because it's kind of difficult in the events of this past week when people walk into pizza places and decide to shoot police officers, and when kids in school decide that that the murder of people seems to be the acceptable way to end a conflict within, or the rest of the things that happen in wars and all that. But what if, that if we could just get past all that and always and always and always, when we think about all the world and everything that is, we can put that newspaper aside, that God declared it not just good, but very good. Very good. It's very telling to sit in lectionary Bible study, and this is my plug for our Wednesday morning group, that when we read this creation narrative and sit around the group of 12 or so or 15, depending on how many show up that morning, and we talk about creation, what jumps up from the table, and that's because we've been meeting long enough that everybody's pretty comfortable with everybody else. And so all of a sudden we find ourselves talking about evolution and geology and anthropology and ologies that we haven't thought of. And there's just a whole bunch of stuff that comes out from this creation narrative. And it's not exactly because that we take it as history, but we take it as God's love towards humanity, and this is why we were called to be. This is the essence of who we are, who the earth is, and how it fits in relationship with everything else and everything that's on it. Everything that's on it. And then the psalm response that we read today sets our place in the order of things, where we were created and what we were created to be. And the fact that we were given dominion over all the earth to subdue it. Which actually means that what we were given was a responsibility to act on God's behalf for it. The problem is that, as many of us know, is that we have this Holiday Inn mentality that we treat it like the room. You go in and it's all in order and everything is perfect and the bed is made and all the stuff is on the counter and everything is where it should be. And then when we leave, it's not so much. We expect somebody else to put it back in order a little bit for us. But every generation that comes to this earth that is blessed to come into it, comes into it with the same expectation that it will be the Holiday Inn room when they want it to be there. Everything's in order. So we have a responsibility to ourselves to make sure, and to our generations, and as we think about this, particularly on this day of Trinity Sunday and Father's Day, to think about what it is that we would like to leave for our kids. I wrote this, the creation narrative tells us about God's love for us. More than anything else, it demonstrates God's love. And on this, particularly this day of Trinity, we wonder how all that fits together and why we read the creation narrative. But we know that this word that was spoken, this word is what John says. This word was with God and was always with God, and the word, and Jesus is the word. So, and then this breath that blows across the Spirit that comes across the void, the formless void, and starts creating and bringing all this into being that we have in God, the creating effort of the Spirit and Jesus and the second person of the Trinity and God, and all of a sudden the Godhead is manifested, and all this comes into being from the edge of the cosmos where God just speaks it into existence. Amazing, isn't it? Fascinating when you think about it. Marvelous in its conception and identity. I wrote the biggest part of the sermon. Oh, I didn't write it. I imagined it. While I was running earlier this week, it's things like that come to me, and bizarre things come into my brain when that happens, because you never know what's going to come out. But I wrote the skeleton of it, and it dawned on me that somehow every aspect of creation is a father-son, father-daughter. It's that parental-child relationship. And so I want us to understand the creation narrative from that perspective, from Father's Day, if you will, or Mother's Day, if you will, or Parent Day, if you will. Whatever it is, it's the idea of that this is a gift to you from your parent who loves you so much. It doesn't make any difference what day it is, but this is your gift. And so when we think about the beginning of it, in the beginning, and we don't want to just run through these words that we've heard them so much and not put any meaning to them. But the way that it starts off and the way that it develops and the way that it continues and the way that it ends up, and we listened to it this morning and it's lengthy, and how's it feel to have a whole chapter of the Bible read to you this morning? You didn't think you was going to get that this morning. It just kind of worked out that way. You got a whole bunch of Bible this morning. Wasn't it good though? Wasn't it grand? I mean, it's not just, it's a story. It's a complete story in the beginning. And then it hands us off to who we are and what we're to do with it. It's before the garden. Everybody wants to get to the garden. We're not there. We're talking about this creation part of it. God from the edges of wherever God is. Transcendence. Speaking. And there it was. Light. The light that separates the dark, that separates from the darkness. Darkness was already there. The formless void was already there. God moved stuff around and organized it in a particular way. In my own thinking, this is the first point that I would like to get to. That God wants us, as we think about our relationship with others in the church and everything, to create order out of chaos. It's one of the most important things that we can do, that when we start looking at it, that what we pass on to our kids is this, it's not so much a structured way of being, but order from chaos means that you've ensured that there is purposefulness. You like that one? There's chaos. That was intentional, by the way. What we get is usefulness where there was no use. Purposefulness where there was no purpose. And when we have our kids and when we enter into a brand new relationship with someone else, which is like a child, when we meet somebody for the very first time, it's the same as if it's brand new, it's fresh. That this is what we should put in the back of our mind. That in the beginning, God created, when He began to create, and all of a sudden there was order where there was something there, where there was no order. So when we start with our relationships with each other, we should not try to do anything that separates us and causes distance between us, or causes conflict between us, because what we're looking for is an orderliness for a purpose where there was no purpose, and usefulness where there was no use for it. It does us no good to relate to each other if we don't do it in a way that benefits us both. That's the first thing. The second thing is, the point is, it has to do with this idea of time. When God gets to day 4. When God gets to day 4, He sets the great lights in the heavens. Which is kind of interesting, because we had days or evenings and mornings before we get to the great lights of the days. But He did this to organize the seasons. And Jesus had a lot to say about time too. It's not my time. Come, let us go. It's time. What if we didn't know? How old would you be if you didn't know how old you were?
Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah, see? What if we lived our life on a continuum rather than here's our, that we're 16, 17. Boy, don't we wish we were No, we're 61, 62. What if we didn't know how old we was, but yet we just started thinking about it's time? When do you retire? Not when you reach a certain age, when it's time. And for high school kids would love this too. When do you graduate high school? When it's time. When do you drive the car for the first time? When it's time. I would have liked that one. But you see what I'm saying is this idea of a time continuum causes us to think about time differently, because God created time and gave it to you so that you would not waste it, but you would use it wisely. And one of the worst things that we do as people that are benefited and live in such abundance is we waste that gift. We waste it. And so we end up looking at today, we've got this brand new start on something, this continuum that we're on, and it looks a whole lot like yesterday. We didn't do nothing yesterday either. What did you accomplish? Not so much. What if we knew that we was on this time continuum, and we knew that every second was a precious gift from God to be useful and purposeful as it was in creation? Might cause us to think about what we did that day. Might cause us to think about so many things, about how we take care of ourselves, and about the foods that we eat, and about how we relate to our neighbors and our children. It becomes very important. When we see this creation narrative about these gifts from God, and it just keeps relentlessly giving to us and saying, here, take them. But don't just take them and put them in your back pocket. Take them and put them to work. The third point that came to me, if I can remember it. Yeah, I know. It has to do with this image of God. That we were created in the image of God. And boy, there's a discussion to talk about there. That if you was to turn to your neighbor and tell them exactly what it means to be created in the image of God, I could probably take a break for a while. Because that means something different to so many different people. Oh, I like this one. Go ahead and turn it up. Time went by. Don't fret, it's only about 30 seconds. Most important words of the song right here. There never seems to be enough time to do the things you want to do once you figure out what those are. There's a line in the song that went something like, if I could do whatever I wanted to do with time, I would save all the days that I have right here and put them on the other end of eternity to spend with you. What if this was your prayer today? Think about that. The poets have been wrestling with the idea of time for such a long time. I had Anne Murray's song picked out first about time. Don't run out on me. The Jan told me that this was her fifth all-time favorite song. So I didn't ask her what 1, 2, 4 was. Think about the time that you use. Think about the time that you use. The third point had to do with the image of God. That we're created in the image of God. And what all that means. And we don't always know what it means to be in the image of God. But we do know a couple things about it. To be in God's image means to be in a certain way in His likeness. And one of the things that we say about God is creator. Which means if we're in the image of God, that creative ability is within us too. And that we should constantly be creating the same thing. Men understand this. They're constantly trying to create things. Mostly havoc for themselves. But creation, the idea of doing something, of being, of engaging, is something that's within us. Most of us don't like to sit. We like to have our minds active and think about that we're doing something special, that we are somehow engaging our brain for the benefit of the world in some particular way. And that's very important. And this image of God that shines within us is, this is God's tool for us to reflect God to the world. You see that? That our image shines within us. This little light of mine. You're going to let it shine. You're going to let it out for the world to see so that the God that's created within you, this image of God that you're created in, goes into the world. Because it does no good to put that bushel basket over the top of it where nobody can see it just because you've got it. Having it, possessing it, does nothing. It's that usefulness and purposefulness. See, do we go back to chaos, order? It's important for others to see this image of God that you were created at, and it's more important for you to see the image of God that others are created in. God, in 1 Samuel, it says that God doesn't look the way that humans look. God looks at the heart. We should too. We should be able to stop looking at people and trying to figure out who they are and what they're doing and start to see the image of God that everybody was created in. That would make our relationships go a lot longer if we started seeing Christ in each person. And thinking about why their circumstances, instead we try to figure out why they are the way that they are. How about if we just forget about all that and we just try to see the image of God? And if it's not there, reflect it from your own self to them so that you can see it. That's what I was trying to make the point about. Use the light reflected from your image of God to shine upon the problem. It's kind of important. Kind of important. Sometimes we ask, what would Jesus do? That was what the part, and it isn't so much what Jesus would do. It's what will you do with Jesus in you? How will you act according to the Spirit that's within you? That's the most important thing. And the last point would be that when God got through creating, He declared it good. After this, and not only that, He added an additional judgment onto that, an evaluator of His work. He said it's very good. And men are really good at this. And this was my Father's Day. I remember how much I used to like that when I had 6 acres to take care of, and I would mow and trim and do all the stuff that needs to be done there and get all the garden just right and the pond looking exactly perfect. And I had the bluing to the water and the white rocks all the way around it. And when I was done with it all, I didn't want to move. I wanted to just look at it. For days I could stand there and look at it. Go get Jane. Jane, come here, look at this. We do this with our gardens. We do this so much with so many other things that we do when we wax the car, or when we do something that we create. We want to look at it. And if we don't take time to stand back and look at it, then why bother to create it? You get somebody else to look at it with you, to share. I've watched the women when they create their stuff back there, the quilts and the shawls and all that stuff. And they do it, and it's just like it's no big deal. They just keep throwing it. And then when you see somebody that appreciates it so much, that's what they do. They look at it. They look at it. And they know the work that went into it. Lastly, the last thing that God did, He hallowed the seventh day, the Sabbath, made it holy. One of the commandments, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. God rested, so you must do also. God commanded it to be so. Whether you worship or not, you're commanded to rest. By convention, we usually do the same thing on one day, that we come and we worship and then we rest or whatever. But the main thing that's being said here is God knows that you cannot continue day after day after day after day, but you must rest. And you need Sabbath rest. You need Sabbath rest, which means that most of the time you contemplate, you think about the things that God has done for us in creation. We're going to start this period of time now, ordinary time, and it takes up a huge chunk of the calendar year. And it's going to call us to look at our mission in the world, and our ministry in the world, and our discipleship in the world. And we'll do this through the Scriptures as we go through this time. And it will become easier for us to understand our discipleship if we put it all up against Genesis 1 through 2:4. The purpose of creation, where we stand in creation, what we're to do in creation, and how we're to use our time. It's all right there. We are the kind of people, I read it this morning, Deb Thomas in a blog that she wrote, says or talks about her mom and dad. They don't ever go anywhere without asking the person, new strangers that they meet, where are you from? I find myself doing the same thing when I go to the hospitals or meet new people. You know, I try to find that point of connection with them. Where are you from? I know that, you know, you don't sound like you're from these parts around here. Where are you from? We try to make that connection so that we have something in common with each other. Hopefully this morning, that when somebody asked you where you're from, that question's been answered. And that because that they've asked you that you will engage them in a way that's useful and purposeful and is discipling, and it shows that you're a creature of God and loved by God just as you are too. Thanks be to God.